The Shuriman Desert is vast, and we're making sure we're prepared for the long trek of it. That's all you need to know, guys. That's all you need to know. The Shuriman Desert is vast, which, I mean, is kind of funny. Like, to anyone who plays Legends of Runeterra a lot, and to anyone who's like, you know, who's been playing a lot since this expansion, it is just kind of like a funny pasta. Like, you either get it or you don't. That's okay. That's okay. But as we can see, there's a lot of pastas happening here, which, you know, that's great. Oh yeah, this was I believe this was a gank special. Yeah, the Shuriman Desert is vast. Like, I don't know. There's just something funny about it. It's it's hard to explain. It is. All right. A lot of people were talking back and forth about, you know, patch notes and where they should go. Oh look. Oh, it's the site. 2 more weeks. Yeah, I updated this to say 2 more weeks. I can't wait when 2 weeks from now Burblefish is nerfed and TM finds another one. Yeah. I mean, you know, the typical comments, right? You know, I think there's a few people. Yeah, stuff like this. Riot needs to consider their balance change schedule. Not nerfing anything in the past few weeks. Yeah. Pretty much everything you'd expect. Seasonal tournaments. There wasn't any pressing need for meta stability. Yeah, I mean, this is a decent hypothesis. I mean, there's definitely, like, multiple factors going on, but that's, like, a fairly good point as well. The biggest thing, if you guys haven't played much of Runeterra, if, like, you've kind of come back with Shurima, at the end of the day, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think that a lot of what people end up, like, complaining about, a lot of what people end up dissatisfied about from a card game standpoint, is stuff that's, like, been here for a while, right? Because people have certain tolerances. Like, even, for example, like, imagine like a really bullshit concept. A lot of people are fine with it as long as it doesn't last for more than, like, a week, right? Because they just forget about it and they move on. But to different kinds of strategies, we have, like, kind of different levels of tolerance and different points at which we're okay with things being meta for X amount of months and stuff like that. So it's not even necessarily that TF Fizz is, like, stronger than any deck we've seen before, although it very arguably is. It's just more about the fact that TF has been on top of the meta for, like, 4 or 5 months now. It's been 2 seasonals, and they didn't really nerf him the first time around. I don't know. I mean, so it wasn't even just me that said this, but back the first time around, I was making a point that they're probably just gonna nerf Go Hard, and they're probably not gonna touch TF, and we're probably gonna end up with another Twisted Fate deck that's just like the new thing that you play, because Go Hard was less of a problem than TF was. And I wasn't like the only one who was saying that too. That wasn't like a raging hot take, but it's something that I was kind of like worried if they weren't, you know, addressing the Bilgewater package directly. Doesn't even necessarily have to be Twisted Fate the card himself, but some people suggest like Burblefish and pick a card, and that's fine. I get tilted when people don't mention Fiora Shen. Yeah, I think Fiora Shen is fine too. Fiora in particular, Fiora Shen has been kind of like super on top of the meta for a long time as well. And that's another one where, I mean, after a certain point, it's like, even if people don't mind playing against the deck that much, if it's on top of the meta for like 6 months plus, sometimes it can be, you know, a good time for a little bit of, you know, a switch, right? And then we've got, oh yeah, here. Just to kind of like, you know, do a brief recap, because I want to at least give like, I guess like a quick comment on the, on this situation, because it did, you know, devolve into, there was a little bit of, I don't know if you could call it drama. People will call anything drama these days. You know, people are just really desperate for something. You know how that is. And like, okay, here we go. Yeah. Did you talk about the Boulevard thread? I'm getting to that. That's the end of this story. And so Twin Suns made this post. Actually, I quite like Twin Suns in general, but I do think this post has kind of like missed the point. They're saying it's actually incredible what Play Runeterra did. They set such an incredibly high standard for live balance. No card game has come close to this. To see all the hate and negativity when we were literally promised nothing for this patch was very sad. Which is like, I mean, it's basically saying that, like, you know, everything is perfectly fine, and like things have been so good in Runeterra that they're allowed to like miss a single thing, and it's not like a big deal. And yeah, we weren't, like, a lot of us were expecting a bug patch anyway, which is like, I mean, there's definitely like some counter argument on that side of things, but I think it does go a little bit it does go a little bit far to that direction. Although, I mean, to be fair, a lot of people were definitely kind of like overbalancing the other way, and I think it was here's Boulevard's response. Yeah, I can actually just pull this up here, and Boulevard has actually made like a full thread. I'm going to strongly disagree. One of the biggest pulls at LoR for me is how frequently the balance changes happened. I'm going to go through the balance history of LoR to explain why today felt so bad. And he goes through, you know, April 14th, LoR launches in 4 weeks, we get our 2 new region. Despite this, 16 balance changes are made. Yes, that's like that's a good point. Like we're going through the full history of it, right? We get our first Bilgewater balance patch. 28 days seems like a long time, but it's what we were told would be the norm, and 18 balance changes are made, hitting many of the problem decks like Bannerman, Burn, Karina, and Heimer, right? So yeah, like right before Bilgewater, 2 weeks before Bilgewater, they put a patch note with like 16 balance changes, and 4 weeks after Bilgewater, they do 18 more. And basically just to like try to stabilize things. These are balance changes that I think are kind of necessary in a lot of ways, because there was a lot about the meta before Bilgewater that I'm assuming the devs were feeling like these cards might restrict Bilgewater's ability to, you know, really shine, that they kind of like had to like safety nerf before then. And then there were a lot of things that were kind of OP on Bilgewater launch. You guys might remember like Grizzled Ranger, Badger Bear, and like Boom Crew Rookie. Those in particular were the ones that got like nerfed 28 days after, which is, you know, it's obviously a major problem if that doesn't happen. And I'm not gonna like read the whole thread here. Let me actually wait. Yeah, I'll just scroll through it. So basically, yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of balance changes. Aphelios releases, we got our first big balance patch in 84 days with 11 balance changes. And then today happened, meaning our next balance patch will be March 31st. And that for the first 3 months of 2021, we got less balance changes than 6 individual patches in 2020. After consistent large patches pre-seasonal, we reached the very frequent changes. Yep, pretty much. So this is, I think this is kind of like the thing that this comment kind of missed out on, in my opinion, and something that Boulevard seems to be saying, which is that it's not like this is like a one-time thing. It's been a trend for like 3 or 4 months at this point, where, I mean, it's not a reaction from today at all, or I guess yesterday at this point, but it's just like the fact that it's sort of reaffirming a concern that, you know, people had, that, you know, we weren't going to be getting very many balance patches. And yeah, basically that what a lot of people liked about Runeterra might be going, you know, going out of fashion per se. Although I'm pretty sure that, I mean, after this level of community outcry, I mean, there's a very good chance that'll be changing. I don't know. I mean, Riot is generally pretty good at listening to the community. So back to the original tweet. Yes, what LoR did is incredible with the bar that they set for live balance, and then they stopped reaching that bar, and it feels even worse because I said it. I praised them when they did it. I will not praise them retroactively for it. Today sucks because it's a confirmation that the old ways are dead. If you're going to show me 13 balance changes in 3 months, I'm not going to randomly hope that you turn that around without the community expressing their displeasure in a way of you handling balance. See, like, Boulevard is saying everything perfectly. Like, like if you guys want to know my take, it's the same. I'm net decking Boulevard. I'm not copying his take, but I'm copying the phrasing of it. He's explaining it better than I probably could, honestly, which is that, yeah, I mean, they did something good, but it feels like it hasn't been done for a while. Today is the confirmation that I'm not going to randomly hope that you turn that around without the community expressing their displeasure in your new way of handling balance. See, like, it's really, really important to phrase it exactly like that, too. Because, yeah, I mean, it's not as if things won't turn around, but it is true that they're probably not going to turn around on their own. And that's part of why that people are just making sure their voices are being heard right now, right? Like, that's pretty much it. Like, he's got everything covered. But yeah, pretty much that's how things are, you know, right now. What do you suggest to fix the state of the game right now? I mean, to be honest, I think that, I mean, I hope that their balance changes are like slightly preemptive. You know, they obviously need to nerf a few of the problem cards, and we already know which cards or which archetypes. I think that it's pretty important for them to try to like buff or in some ways tweak Shurima cards at the same time, and I hope that's part of what we're going to be getting in the patch notes in 2 weeks. Something that's really important to understand, and something that I don't think Riot has been great at, is that when you're going into nerf cards, it's fine to nerf cards on a card level, right? Like when you're nerfing things, a card is just like a component of something, right? A card doesn't mean anything on its own. Nobody gets mad at a card. People get mad at decks that cards are used in, right? And people get mad at multiple decks that certain cards are being used in and suggest that the certain card is probably the best target for the nerf of the multiple decks that they get annoyed at. But a card is just a component. It doesn't mean anything. Think of it like letters and words, right? Like it's just a letter. You can't get mad at a letter. It's kind of inherently meaningless. So in a lot of cases, you can nerf individual cards if they're like they're easily pointed to as like the common source of problems. So that's fine. Nerfing individual cards makes sense if they're like common sources of issues. When Nat E needs a nerf. Yeah, when you're like looking to buff archetypes though, it's kind of important to make sure that you're actually like looking through the archetype and like looking to try to like buff a new concept or like make something playable that wasn't really seeing play before. And I do think that in the past, Runeterra balance patches back when we used to get them were pretty over focused on buffing like individual cards. There were a lot of buffs to like random ass like cards that weren't seeing much play. God, what was it? Do you guys remember? You guys could probably think of like good examples of this. But I remember like, okay, like Jay Medarda got a buff, Ren Shadowblade got a buff, Mage Seekers, yeah, Mage Seekers got it. Well, Mage Seekers, Mage Seekers were at least an attempt to try to like make a sort of new archetype. For the most part, a lot of cards were kind of like, I think, almost randomly buffed, just like random one-off cards that aren't really supposed to connect much or aren't really like trying to accomplish much as a card in terms of archetypes or in terms of regions. And I think that for moving forward for balanced patches, it would probably be good to have more of a focus on buffs. Like instead of trying to like focus on individual cards, trying to like take archetypes or packages that are seen less play and well, like, or haven't ever seen play. Like Lulu support is a good example of a package that's like always been like, yeah, and people are talking about Lulu these days. That's like one of the things. Yeah, that kind of thing. So I think that's important. And by the way, when I'm saying that, I'm not suggesting that multiple cards be buffed instead of singular cards being buffed. That's not what I'm saying at all, right? I'm not saying that they can't look at the Lulu package and say, okay, let's say if we took this Lulu package, this is a toy example, don't read into this, but let's say if we took Lulu package and we made picks like, a 0 mana card, right? Who cares? That kind of thing, a single card change isn't really a bad thing. That's not my point. My point is that it's important to go through the changes with the goal of making sure that you're trying to empower like a whole branch of cards instead of just like 1 or 2 cards randomly used, right? That's the thing. War Chefs to a 1/1? Yeah, they could buff War Chefs to a 1/1. That could work too. Why is this card a 2/2? Support won't work until we have a keyword that works on defense. I mean, that's definitely not true, but it is true that a large part of the problem with support is that it only works on 1/2. Like that's, I mean, there's a lot of solutions to that problem. You said same to my comment about Lulu. Yeah, you main Fiora. Listen, I don't main Fiora. I've never once mained Fiora. I just really like Fiora. I've never had like most of my games being played on Fiora. That's never once happened. Okay, I've mained a lot of things throughout the days, and I might have a particular affinity for Fiora, a penchant for Fiora, but I don't main Fiora, come on. I don't know. I'm quite curious. I think that, we'll have some kind of like community response from Riot about like, there will be some kind of announcement in the next couple of weeks. They'll have to like change something about, or at least announce something, or at least like say like what's happening with the balance patches, stuff like that. I expect we'll at least get a little bit more information about what's going to be happening in the next couple of weeks. And that I'm pretty interested in seeing how that'll work out, because they haven't done one of those like roadmap dev announcement things for a while. Someone at Riot must have the biggest hard on for TF, honestly. Yeah, because like TF he plays card games, and this is a card game, so like obviously he has to be the only deck. Duh. I'm just like, I wish there was more to mess around with that felt viable. There's definitely a lot of like tier 3 decks you can build. For me personally, I kind of draw the line at like tier 2. It doesn't really feel like there's a lot new stuff you can do in tier 2. Like, apart from, of course, the few that people already are doing, right? You know, like Azir Lucian is a pretty decent deck. Sivir LeBlanc or like Sivir Ashe are okay. Although, or sorry, not Sivir Ashe, LeBlanc Ashe. But yeah, that's fine too. I have a tier 2 deck that no one is playing. If no one's playing it, then it's not tier 2. I mean, you might have like a win rate which is comparable to the win rates at tier 2. But that's not how tiers work, no. Look what one game of Aphelios did to this man. So, like, I mean, it was a really long game, though. That's the thing. Like, one game of Aphelios is like 4 games of something else. Was this new expansion better than last one? It's a complicated question that really depends what you mean. I mean, the short answer is yes, but the long answer is that the actual, like, the expansion right now is kind of, in a way, it's sort of getting ruined by the last one. If that makes sense. I wouldn't say the problem is the expansion right now, but this expansion feels worse because of problems that were already in the game that they didn't fix at the same time of this expansion. Shurima is a cool region. I like how it's designed. However, because of power creep of like, you know, let's say Bilgewater and Targon, but it's not just like confined to those regions, and Shurima releasing as like half a region due to the expansion system, it feels like there's not a lot you can mess around with. Basically, I wouldn't say that this expansion is flawed. I would say that the overall expansion system of releasing them in half regions is, I think, flawed. I don't really like it, and this will happen a lot. And I think that the last expansion and like the meta and the balance that went into prior to Shurima are creating a lot of problems. So like, I don't know. It's not that the expansion is bad, but yeah, it's just the timing and incidental nature of a lot of other things right now that are causing problems. They need to do balance patches with the expansion if they want to release like this. Yeah, exactly. Like, without toning down old stuff, if they release new stuff as like a half an expansion, it's not going to be good. I think a lot of people literally forgot. Like, people straight up forgot that when Targon launched, it was a little underwhelming. Which, it sounds funny to say, because, like, you know, Targon's a really strong region right now. And it's kind of always been toxic / oppressive. But, like, after about, like, 3 weeks, like, so on the first balance patch after Targon, they didn't do much. They only nerfed a couple of things. I think that was one where they, like, gave Hush a little bit of a nerf. Aurelion Sol went to, like, 25 instead of 20. But, like, Targon wasn't really that strong when it launched. It was probably a little bit more strong than Shurima is right now. But, like, at the actual launch state, it was, like, average or below average. I think a lot of people really enjoyed Asol. Asol was really fun. His win rates were never really like that good at that point in time. I think that was mostly just because he was super cool to play, and he wasn't bad. Like, it's not like he was intentionally like weak or anything like that. But yeah, Targon also launched in a fairly underwhelming state as soon as they like did like a couple minor nerfs after the first like month, and like people kind of like, you know, the hype died down. It wasn't all that, and I think people are kind of like realizing that, yeah, I mean the expansion system will kind of cause that. Like, splitting expansions into 3 is just, like, really awkward in a lot of ways. And I think that's causing a large part of the issues right now. But yeah, of course, you know, just combined with, like, the fact that there weren't any balance changes to decks that, like, that everyone knew were going to be unfair. Targon came with a balance patch? Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, like, I mean, if they do balance, like, it's the problem of 2 different things. But if they do balance patches, the expansion system at least like won't feel as bad. Like and it's sad because I really like Shurima. Like Shurima to me is one of the coolest regions. Like it might be the coolest region. I like a lot of their mechanics. I like a lot of their cards. Their champions are for the most part like pretty interesting and complicated. From what we've seen so far, I think that Mono-Shurima will be a lot of fun when we actually have like the 4th Ascended and more Shurima cards. I think a lot of people view Mono-Shurima as like a flawed deck concept, and I literally don't think that's true. I think that Mono-Shurima feels bad right now because of the expansion system, but when we have, I think Xerath is supposed to be an Ascended, as well as like the rest of the Shurima cards, like Mono-Shurima won't even be a bad deck probably. We don't know what the rest of the cards are, but it'll get a lot better. Like right now it's just a fact that you can't fit enough cards in, right? And yeah, I mean, I like a lot of what they're trying to do. I like the predict stuff. It's pretty cool. I really like the sort of like, you know, the payday and like the keyword buffing. There's a lot of neat things going on, but just because of those two factors, they're releasing half expansions at once, and the fact that in this case they didn't like balance around the new expansion, it just leaves it feeling a little bit, you know, underwhelming, right? That's all. So it's I would say people that sort of like feel like the problem is with the expansion. I mean, it's important to clarify what you mean, right? Like, I think that the launch, you could call the expansion launch kind of bad because of a lot of decisions around the launch, but it's not, I wouldn't call it a problem with the it's not the expansion itself. It's just the other things that were happening at the same time, right? And that's a really important distinction, because it's a pretty cool expansion. And before they nerf TF Fizz, and Lee will be the only deck. Yep, that's something we were saying yesterday, that there's a decent chance that kind of thing will happen. Lee gets pretty crazy pretty fast when TF Fizz isn't holding it down. Predict is very important since we have a very important component for combo decks. Yeah, exactly. And if Shurima has like more things, which they will in that direction when we see them, then yeah, the combo decks will make more sense. Like I really do like Shurima. It's super cool. But yeah, I mean, that's just kind of like how I feel right now. And none of this is a hot take. Like, this is pretty accurately reflected with like most of the community. Like, I don't really have any hot takes in all of this. I pretty much agree with everything that the community is saying in this case. Well, I guess not everything, because that would be by definition contradictory, since there's at least, you know, some disagreement. But I mean, for the most part, yeah, the broad community assertions. And so another thing is, we know in 2 weeks for the balance patch, they'll be buffing some of the Shurima cards right now, which is cool. I hope we'll see a decent amount of that. I think that they're getting the feedback at a good time, because they have to decide the balance patch is like 2 weeks in advance, right? And so they're basically sitting down right now and planning out what it's going to look like in 2 weeks when we actually get it. I have pretty good expectations, pretty high hopes, realistic ones, that Shurima will have some like pretty decent buffs, in the right kinds of ways, right? To try to like enable like some of these newer concepts to feel like a little bit more on the level, because it's not just like TF Fizz and TF Aphelios that's like holding back Shurima. I mean, that's definitely a large factor right now, but a lot of it is just like Shurima itself feeling kind of like power crept broadly, and of course only working with half a region. I mentioned this like a while ago, but one of the flaws with this expansion system, which isn't necessarily a flaw, but it's something that they have to be very, very aware of, or it will be a flaw, is that they'll have to be like rebalancing it every step of the way. Because like as they add new cards of the new region, in this case Shurima, they'll have to be like nerfing pre-existing cards as they add more to keep it in line. So what that means is like they basically need to release regions with some kind of OP cards, and then they need to like nerf them by the time the second batch of cards comes out. And then they need to nerf them again by the time the third batch of cards comes out. Something like that. That is a broad oversimplification of exactly like what needs to happen. It doesn't have to look precisely like that. There are many different ways it can go. But to be able to like keep things generally balanced while you're releasing like parts and parts of new expansions, and you want to like balance out like play rates and win rates, you will have to do something along those lines. And we did see them do that with Targon, right? Like, you know, they released Targon pretty hot. They cooled it down a little bit right off the bat, and then like every time they added new Targon cards, they nerfed some of the others, right? And I honestly went about as well as it could have with Targon in that aspect. I like these split expansions, but if they're gonna not keep giving us balance changes, that's gonna change real fast. They do. I mean, they're heavily mitigated by like the balance changes. In the list of hopes, I hope that they will definitely make some of the new cards feel a little bit better. Is there a ton apart from like Shurima? Like it'd be so cool to just have like another one of those, like, yeah, like the old balance patch notes where we had like 16 or 20 patch changes and we could just go through it. Like they could do so much with that. That would make it feel a lot better. Cause there's like some tweaks they could make to like LeBlanc too. That could be really cool. Or when I say a champion, I'm referring to the archetype. It doesn't have to be directly to this card, but in this case I mean like reputation. Sivir seems good, just a little homeless. Kindred is a pretty cool concept, but some might say she's best where she is right now. And then as some people mentioned, I think it's definitely a good opportunity to try to like do at least like a little minor nerf to like Fiora Shen or Fiora directly. They will probably take Fiora and reduce one of her numbers. They'll like make her a 2-3 or they'll make her a 3-2 or something like that. They'll probably give her the Aphelios treatment. 3-2 is good. Yeah, I mean, I'd be fine with that. A lot of people are kind of like I don't want to use the word overthinking because I think that's a dumb word. I don't know. The Fiora change, a lot of people are like feeling like you like the OTK, it should just do like 15 damage instead of just being in a win the game on the spot, or like, oh, she has to be like, her effect can't exist in the game. I really don't think that's true at all. And I mean, I don't know exactly how hard she should get nerfed. That's definitely for, it's a hard decision exactly how to balance this card, but you wouldn't like delete this concept from the game. You would just like make it a lot harder to get off. As long as she has like 2 health or 2 attack or something. I mean, you could tweak her numbers in a lot of different ways. Like, this happens every time. Like every time there's something that is like broadly kind of like toxic and people are like, well, it needs a fundamental change. And that can definitely be true. There are some concepts that are inherently just wildly unbalanceable. But for the most part, when you have these kinds of things like Karma, so it happened with Karma, it happened with Nab. Like when you have these kinds of things, if you just make them a little bit weaker, like it becomes much harder to actually like get the win condition off, right? I'm sure they'll just make her like a 3-2 or something like that. Aphelios needs a fundamental change. Maybe. I mean, that's definitely a much closer candidate than Fiora. But even like Aphelios, like if you made him 4 mana, he would certainly be like a lot more in line. He'd be definitely closer to warranting a fundamental change than Fiora. It depends what you mean by fundamental change. Do you mean like something bigger than just making him 4 mana and nerfing like one of the weapons? I don't really think so. I don't know. I wouldn't really agree he needs a fundamental change. He needs a big change, but a big change and a fundamental change are 2 different things, right? Fiora kills a lot of decks. Yeah, I mean, as much as I like Fiora, I'm not going to be biased enough to say that she doesn't warrant a nerf. Like, she's been, like, powerfully representing the metagame for a very, very long time now. Mono-Fiora specifically is a little bit too high on the power level for being kind of unfun to play against. So this is where it's like, it should be the simplest thing in the world, right? I'm going to say Fiora would be a little bit better if she was slightly nerfed, again, -1 health or something like that. And I'm going to say that a large part of that reason is people don't find like Mono-Fiora really fun to lose against over and over again. And Fiora Shen is really dominant in the meta for literally like 8-9 months now. But people will say, the common response is, well, Swim, aren't alternate win conditions good? Isn't like divergent deck building like part of what makes card games interesting? Don't you want like Mono-Fiora to exist in the game? Yes, of course. And that's why it's a slight nerf more than anything else. Like the thing is, it's all about balance, right? Like if you take this thing and you lower the play rate and you lower the win rate and you lower the amount of times people are going to see it, then it still is able to be a fun concept for people that enjoy playing it without being exactly, annoying enough to the people that don't like playing around it, right? People think that nerf means kill. It's all about slight tweaks. Yeah, in this case in particular, like, at the end of the day, there exists a very, very simple power level that these cards have kind of wanted. Like, every card is designed to be at a different power level, right? Some cards are designed to be weak and some cards are designed to be strong, and there's literally nothing wrong with that. That's just how things are, because the players that play strong decks have different psychologies to the players that play weak decks, and they're going to like different things. This is just very, very straightforward game design, right? The thing about Fiora is that, as Mono-Fiora in particular as a deck has gotten so many tools, it's over the past like 6 months, in like Strafing Strike, in even like Golden Aegis they have now. People are running like 3 Sisters. I don't even know if that's 100% proper in the deck, but like, and there's 1 or 2 more as well, but it's just at the point where her win rate and play rate are a little higher than they would like, and you are having to want to make it a little bit lower than that, right? I mean, that's all it is. It's just about finding the right balance. The problem is -1 health doesn't really hurt Mono-Fiora and kills Fiora Shen. Ooh. I don't know if I'd agree with exactly that. I think if your assertion was that it would hurt Fiora Shen more than it would hurt Mono-Fiora, that definitely might be true. Like, it's I don't think it's that far off, but yeah, it might hurt Fiora Shen a bit more. And that's great, because that's important to understand. Like, if we want to nerf Mono Shen more than we want to nerf, Fiora Shen. Did I say Mono Shen? Mono-Fiora. If we want to nerf Mono-Fiora more than we want to nerf Fiora Shen, then yeah, I mean, you could do something a little bit different. But I don't even know if that conclusion is true, that it would nerf Mono-Fiora significantly significantly less than Fiora Shen. I don't know if that premise is true, that we want to nerf Mono-Fiora more than we want to nerf Fiora Shen. I mean, both of those are very arguable points. It would definitely affect Mono-Fiora. Mono-Fiora would definitely be affected by 1 less health, like for sure. So yeah, that's the thing about the balance changes. So I guess like what I'm thinking about and what I'm kind of like hopeful for is, yeah, I mean, pretty much as stated. I mean, they'll have to nerf TF package in some way. They'll have to nerf the Aphelios package in some way. Aphelios has to be nerfed directly, whereas Twisted Fate, in theory, if they wanted to nerf like both Pick a Card and a Burblefish, and they could maybe get away with not touching Twisted Fate the card directly, I guess. I don't know if that's advisable, but compared to Aphelios, who kind of has like more, like, there's less other things you can nerf about Aphelios. Of course there's Veiled Temple, but I think that wouldn't be quite enough in Aphelios' case. Yeah, some kinds of Shurima buffs or buffs to new cards that feel like they could use a little bit of help. I think that it'd be cool to see like a Talia buff in particular, and that's the kind of thing that I expect them to do, right? They said they're nerfing stress testing. Did they? I'm not really on board with that. I think that's kind of trolly. 2 mana stress testing? Yeah, just make it 2 mana. I don't know. I mean, I think that if part of their nerf to TF was stress testing, yeah, that would be pretty trolly. I could see some arguments for it. It's not like an indefensible point, but I think that this happens a lot in games. You see this often in like community suggestions, which is that the community often suggests like reverting or changing things based on like what the catalyst for that change was. Well, what the perceived catalyst for that change was. People literally have this just like built-in idea of like some kind of, TF was chugging along and then they added stress testing and now TF is too good. Therefore, stress testing should be the one that gets reverted or nerfed. I've seen that a lot. I see that so much. A lot of times this happens with like buff reverts too. Like, Swim, do you think they should revert Will of Ionia to 4 mana? I get that so goddamn much. I've literally had people ask me that, I think like at least a dozen times in the past like 8 months. And the reasoning is literally just that Ionia was seeing a lot of play as a region, and that at one point Will of Ionia was made 5 mana, and that was around the same time that Ionia stopped really seeing play. So the answer is no, it doesn't really make sense. But the most important thing is like the line of reasoning doesn't really make sense. It like there's no reason that we have to just like take a change that happened around at the same time as the other change, right? Like that's not really good design. It should just be what actually makes the most sense to change. That's the thing about stress testing. Like there's nothing really stress testing is doing that's like unfair. It's just attaching itself to a combo that is inherently unfair, right? Like stress testing takes the TF combo and makes it a lot better. Like it was already a really powerful deck without stress testing, and stress testing, like for example, if let's say they only nerf stress testing and like everything else is intact, well, that wouldn't be good, and I'm sure they're not going to do that. That'd be crazy. I don't see a need to even like include this as like part of the nerf, honestly. I don't know. Like TF's been really broken for a while. I don't think a lot of people realize how strong TF has been. People took like 2 or 3 months to figure out that that deck should be running Burblefish. TF's been good for a very long time now. TF Fizz, TF Go Hard, TF Swain, TF Ezreal. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's literally since, like, I don't want to say since Bilgewater came out, because that's, like, definitely at least a bit of an exaggeration. Like, TF decks got a lot better in the following months, but, it's been a while now. TF level up goes to round end. They could change it in a lot of different ways. Trust me, guys, the game is way more unhealthy when Will is at 4. Yeah, the thing is, I mean, we do want to make Ionia a better region. Yeah, I mean, Ionia is definitely, like, a little bit rougher on the edges as a region. Ionia has felt like it's lost a lot of its purpose to exist lately, slowly over time, but it's been lowering and lowering, and yeah, there's not a lot of reason to play Ionia right now. It's just off the back of a couple things, but the solution to that isn't like bringing back their like insane cards. It's more about just like fleshing out their archetypes. The thing is, Ionia doesn't even really have archetypes. Like, name an archetype that exists in Ionia. Seriously, think about it. Some of you guys are gonna say elusives, and some people say Yasuo. And then if you're a smartass, you'll say Lee Sin. But, I mean, Lee Sin is a Targon archetype. There's not really anything else. Like, a lot of their cards don't really, like, belong to archetypes. Karma. Karma's not really an archetype, though. Ionia has a few good cards, but they don't have a win condition since elusive got nerfed. That's part of it. Shadow Assassin at 2/2 wouldn't even be that good, TBQH. Yeah, this has actually happened a lot in Runeterra, where, like, the game has slowly been power creeping. And a lot of times, like, a nerf comes out at the same time as, like, they nerfed Shadow Assassin at around the same time that they printed Zap Sprayfin. I don't actually remember if it was, like, right before or right after, but it was around the same time. I think it was after. And honestly, I mean, for the sake of, like, expansion balancing, I think that kind of decision is totally fine. Because, like, I mean, if you're releasing new cards and you want to make sure people are playing around them, you want to be, like, kind of taking some, like, caution nerfs in same ways people are suggesting should have happened this time around, with like just making sure that there's kind of like no dominant tier 1 decks to sort of pave the way for like new content, new cards to be kind of experimented with and fun. But Shadow Assassin, like, not giving Ionia anything else at that point. Like, all their cards have been like nerfed and then subsequently power crept without being like rebuffed, you know? Like, Shadow Assassin got nerfed at the same time as they printed Zap anyway. And, like, you know, Deny got nerfed a long time ago, and now there's, like, Rite of Negation. It's, like, it just feels like somewhere along the way they could have buffed it. I don't think that it's, like, even the biggest deal ever, but I'm sure they'll be, you know, addressing that and making Ionia feel like it has a little bit more of a purpose lately. The last card releases for Ionia have felt really bad. It's been really, like, okay, so in Targon, when we look at their new cards, let's look. So Call of the Mountain, Ionia gets Lulu and some of the support cards. Now they get Nopify, which is just like a power card. But yeah, so Lulu in the support package. Then in part 2, they get Monastery of Harana and Homecoming. And since Homecoming got 4 mana, it's actually not that bad. Especially in some like Landmarks decks. It's aight. And then some of this. So it's like, Ionia is just such a weird region right now. They're getting like kind of nothing. They're not really getting like real cards, right? They're getting like kind of like random one-offs that don't really have a home or don't really fit into decks, but just like I knew it was like just a random assortment of cards that feel kind of purposeless, right? Like the Lulu archetype hasn't really been functional. A lot of these cards are just like, oh, have a random card, you know, Monastery. It doesn't really make sense. There's no reason to recall that much in a game. There's no card that gives us like recall synergy in that way. Like Yasuo doesn't make sense to run with Monastery. He says the word recall on him, and this card says the word recall on it, but that's not synergy, right? So it just feels like a lot of like purposeless or semi-purposeless cards. And then we got like Shadow Apprentice and Field Musicians. And Field Musicians is interesting, and maybe it'll be nuts one day. I mean, it doesn't have a home now, but if it ever finds a deck, it'll be good. And Shadow Apprentice is cool. I mean, I like it in encouraging elusives, but again, it just feels like, you know, they don't really have like new stuff. Homecoming has seen play with Lysandra. Yeah, and some League versions are running it, and that's it. When Irelia comes to Runeterra, it will be good. So that's the thing. Like, I mean, we can't just rely on single champions making regions make sense, right? Because then we just kind of lose a lot of like the like intra region diversity. The like different decks within regions. Like we don't want regions that are only good because of one card, right? And the best example of that is like, I mean, there's a couple examples of that. We're already talking about Ionia, and Ionia is only good because of Lee Sin and Shen for Fiora Shen right now. And then there's like Bilgewater, which, you know, I mean, the thing is, when they nerf TF, however they're nerfing it, whether they nerf Pick a Card or Twist the Fate or whatever, Bilgewater is probably going to feel really shit as a region, right? Like, Bilgewater is a good example of a region that's kind of like currently being just like insanely solo carried right now. And yeah, people will point out like Pirate Burn is a deck that does make sense, which is very fair, but you're not really using like many of like very specific tools. That's pretty much the only other one right now. So yeah, I mean, that's just something to be aware of. It's fine if Bilgewater takes a dive for a bit. The thing is, like, in long-term balance, it's not about making every snapshot balanced. It's not about making like every month balanced. You want to be creating like areas of balance within like both long-term and short-term, right? And I think a lot of people aren't really thinking about that. But like, imagine you're balancing a game. You're balancing a meta game, right? And like everything is perfectly balanced every month. Every month, the amount of like regions and the amount of archetypes that are being represented is like as high as it could possibly be. You're getting all the regions making sense. You're getting all the archetypes making sense. And like, you know, you have sometimes there's like, you know, a week where this is a little bit higher. Sometimes there's a week where this is a little lower, but on a month-to-month scale, you're good. The problem with that is that's not necessarily even like the most important thing, because if your month-to-month isn't changing, then that's also a problem, right? Like, you don't want this state of stagnant balance, right? What you want is like the month to month to be pretty balanced, and then the longer scope of things, the like 6 months to year, that kind of range, you want that to also be broadly representative of balance, but while having like variety built in, right? If that makes sense. Because it needs to fluctuate. It needs to fluctuate while being balanced. And that's not easy. That's not easy by any means. But it's important to note that when I say something like, okay, when they nerf Twisted Fate, however they nerf it, Bilgewater's gonna kind of suck, that's not even necessarily a bad thing. Like, they're gonna have 9 regions, and eventually we're gonna have like fucking 12 or whatever. We're not gonna be able to have all regions see play at any given point in time. It's just about like keeping things in check long term, right? A large part of the reason people don't like TF Fizz and Fiora Shen is because they've been around for so goddamn long at this point, right? That's the thing. Like, if these were new decks, it might be annoying, but it would not be the same thing, like it at all. They would at least be new decks, right? And sure, like it would be like, oh yeah, a problem, and maybe they could nerf it, but most of the problem right now isn't even because of that necessarily. It's just because, you know, people are pretty tired on it, right? And that's kind of like, that's the most important thing with metagame design that I think a lot of people forget, that you want to set it up so that there's little, you can even say like slight rotations, right? It's important that they don't last too long. Like some people have argued, Ionia has been rotated out for too long. And yeah, I think that's probably true, but it's not as if it's a flaw of meta design if like a region or an archetype or whatever doesn't see play for a period of time. That's not a problem, right? It just comes down to the amount of time. Would draw 10 plus cards kill TF? No. You mean TF's level up being draw 10 instead of draw 8? No, it wouldn't. What's J4's biggest problem? That you're forced into open attacking and that he doesn't have a different mode. You can't play him from hand when you don't want to open attack. because he doesn't have like flexibility in his approach. He needs to have something that lets him at least like have challenger or like more stats, or like he needs to be playable from hand. I think stun not hitting champions sure would be better. Oh yeah, gold card. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of just like when we connect the dots and when we're trying to identify patterns of what makes things good or what makes things toxic, a lot of it revolves around effects that are turned on both players' turns. The thing is, attacking blows in Runeterra. Like, it's pretty bad. The problem with attacking is you can only do it every other turn. So why the fuck would you attack, right? Like, some decks want to attack, and attacking is nice, but it's not as good as not attacking. If you can play cards that are able to just like do powerful things without attacking, that's just better. And I mean, Twisted Fate and Aphelios are probably the best two examples of that. There are others. And yeah, that's part of the reason that you can say Talia's bad as well. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Renekton, there's at least a general trend. There are definitely plenty of exceptions if cards are like powerful enough, but for the most part, like the strongest things in Runeterra tend to be stuff that doesn't need to attack, because you get their effect every turn, right? Like your Aphelios is getting its effect every turn, your Twisted Fate is getting its effect every turn, and of course you don't need to worry about like getting stunned out or silenced, because things that need to attack need to be able to attack, which is a further problem. So basically right now, the things that are kind of like most powerful about TF and Aphelios are just you don't even attack with them. They're getting you value on both attacking turns and defensive turns, and they're often like triggering their abilities off of some like burst speed interactions. A lot of what TF and Aphelios do are just like burst uninteractable things, right? Like stuff that doesn't go on the stack. Like you're leveling Twisted Fate at burst speed, right? You are playing your cards at burst speed when your opponent attacks. Aphelios is similar with a lot of like the like generate weapons or like Veiled Temple interactions that has a lot of like burst speed stuff that is just completely uninteractable. So what the problem we have right now in Runeterra, and the problem that Runeterra is going to need to kind of like face as a game, is that Runeterra is an extremely reactive game. Runeterra is an extremely reactive game. What do I mean by that? I mean that in most metas in Legends of Runeterra, proactive strategies tend to on average be weaker than reactive strategy. Again, there's exceptions, but this is on average very, very true. And the problem is, and the reason I should say why that is because, you know, I mean, you're both playing on both players' turns, right? Like you have all your mana, like, you know, it's not Hearthstone where you're just alternating turns. You're both, you know, you're interrupting what they do. You have your stack, and it's all about just like stopping them and shutting them down, and just making sure that, you know, they're whoever commits the card first is at an inherent disadvantage, right? Like whoever plays their unit first, you know, you can just react to that by playing your own unit and it's better, right? This is like different from Magic too, because Magic doesn't really have the unit alternating system. Like even in like stuff like invokes or stuff like mid-rangey, being able to react to what your opponent is doing on every action is just better, right? Like your opponent plays a big scary 4-drop, and it's true that all your spells can react to this, but even just reacting with a unit is powerful, right? Because like when you see them play their unit, then you can play your House Spider, or you can play your whatever. You have more information, you can react better, right? So like when I say reactivity, I'm not just talking about spells. I'm talking about like the unit reactivity too. Reactivity is just what you want in Runeterra. And even aggro decks have to make a lot of reactive decision points. This is interesting from a design standpoint. It's not, I can't call it an inherent flaw per se. I think it's a little bit too reactive, but at the very least, a problem with the game is that I think a lot of the balancing isn't necessarily reflecting this level of reactivity, which is to say some of the most powerful things in Runeterra, because it's such a reactive game inherently, the most powerful things in Runeterra are cards that A, play for a somewhat reactive game plan. You can stop your opponent from doing what they're trying to do. We see this in like TF gold card, red card. We see this in all of Aphelios' cards, like half of Aphelios' cards. And B, stuff that is pretty immune from these tools of reactivity, right? These are two very important components. You see this in Twisted Fate, of course, because he is like, even if you like kill him, he's still, you know, fine. You're still like blue carding, you're still getting value. So even when he dies, it's perfectly fine. Usually, currently, Twisted Fate is being like turbo leveled at speed, which means like you're getting cards off and you can play a second level TF later. But also, I mean, you know, they can protect him too. They have like suit up and stuff like that in the current deck. There's been like a lot of ways to protect TF, and there's TF Aphelios decks as well that have a lot of ways to protect it. And Aphelios does a similar thing where you have like the guaranteed on-play value, and you are like, even if they kill the Aphelios, I mean, that aspect of him is a little bit better now that they nerfed Aphelios to 2 health. He's a little bit more killable, but still, as soon as you play Aphelios, like TF, you're drawing a card, so you're up in value when they kill him, even when that happens. And of course, when it doesn't happen, you're just kind of winning the game. Lee Sin, best example, can just combo kill you no matter what, pretty much. Yeah. Lee is a pretty good example as well, right? So that's kind of the pattern in Runeterra. This is pretty straightforward. I think this is extremely intuitive. Runeterra, by its definition, is a very reactive game. And so the most generally kind of like toxic strategies are ones that have both of those qualities. A, exhibit a very high level of this reactivity, and B, kind of be very, very, I'm not going to say immune, but extremely resilient towards opponent's attempt at reactivity, right? Which should make sense. I mean, that's pretty clear. So I think a large part of the problem just becomes the fact that TF Aphelios are like really low risk to play, right? They're sort of like power crept versions of like old Heimerdinger, where, you know, I mean, Heimerdinger used to be like this 5-mana thing that you'd have to like protect, and there were certain decks at the times that basically had like, you know, really powerful ways of being able to protect Heimerdinger, to the point of it being kind of toxic. But then they made like 4-mana TF, and then they made 3-mana Aphelios. Like, compare Aphelios to Heimerdinger, like, honestly. Like, seriously, take a good hard look. It's weird. It's like these kinds of things used to be 5 mana. It's crazy, right? And like, Aphelios gives you guaranteed value when you play him too, whereas Heimerdinger is like, you know, you have to like set up for it and keep alive for the turn. So you can address this problem with a lot of different like angles. There's a lot of different ways, you know, to try to do this, but for the most part, that it's important to understand like what the issue is, like why people are talking about, you know, Twisted Fate, and what exactly is happening there. So yeah, for the most part, champions that just are fully reactive, and you don't have to act to what the opponent is doing, end up being good, and the proactive champions end up being bad. Now, here's an interesting question, which is, someone will say, well, Swim, by this logic, what about Kindred? Shouldn't Kindred be doing better? Because Kindred like kills the opponent's thing, right? So the misconception here, this is actually why people thought Kindred would be good and why Kindred ends up sucking. Because Kindred kind of looks like a reactive champion, but it's like really, really, really not. Kindred is very, very proactive. Like, there's nothing about Kindred that's reactive at all, actually. Like, marking an opponent for death that dies at the end of their round when you make the first play isn't reactive. It's proactive. It's the opposite. Like, you're making a play to mark something and that's dying at the end of their turn. So it's not stopping their attack. You have to make the first action to even like make this a start, right? People like it sort of baits you into thinking that it's like not at fast speed, right? That's the way to think about it. It's not really at fast speed. Like, you know, a single combat is a card that can be reactive. But when you compare it to like Siphoning Strike is proactive, right? Because it's slow speed. And in certain board states, this can definitely react to what the player is doing. Yeah. But as a broad generalization, like the whole point of reactivity is the ability to do things at speed. That's what reactivity is, right? Kindred can kill their board, and it can like sometimes do like weird setups where you can get high value. But for the most part, you, as the Kindred player, you are the one that's playing it first. You're the one that's committing the mana. And if they kill it in an efficient way, you're losing out on value, which is not true of either TF or Aphelios. But most importantly, you are the one who, at the start of every turn, to be able to get the mark, you have to do something proactive, right? You are the one that has to start the chain. And then the opponent can react to like where your mark is going, what the Slay is like thinking about, right? So Kindred is a really good example of like why reactivity is so much more powerful than proactivity in Runeterra. I like Kindred. Kindred's a cool card. I think a lot of people will be able to like relate to feeling like Kindred would be really pretty good and then being like, oh wait, I'm not really able to interact with, I'm not able to react to my opponent's strategy when I play Kindred. In fact, if anything, they're the ones reacting to my strategy. That's actually a large part of the reason why Kindred is bad. Like, kind of the entire reason, actually. So yeah, it's all about just like this giant floor for value in the ability to just like, you know, force the opponent to react. Or no, sorry. Force the opponent to act proactively into you every turn, right? That's what makes these things good. And the thing about that is that it's important to understand that even if Twisted Fate isn't like super turbo leveling, like that's why Twisted Fate is really strong. And he's gotten stronger as times went on. But like, for example, if the balance patch 2 weeks from now, if they were to take Twisted Fate and not change the card, if they were to like nerf Burblefish a little bit and maybe nerf pick a card a little bit, I don't think that would be enough, honestly. Not really, because at the end of the day, it would definitely help the short term. It would like, it might resolve the problem for that deck, but I think Twisted Fate needs to be at least like a little bit harder to level, or his level payoff has to be a little bit less. You know, so something probably direct to the card himself, because Twisted Fates, he's not just like exclusive to this one deck, right? Just like he wasn't exclusive to Go Hard. Burst speed cards are toxic and half of them are too strong compared to Magic, where you can even counter summons. In Runeterra, you can counter strongest cards even with the designated counter spell cards. You can't counter. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, pretty much. And that's something that like a lot of people were saying early on too, that like Burst is kind of like, Burst feels just like one of the more toxic things in like, there's just no reaction to anything. I think the thing about Burst is it's not just burst speed cards, but it's burst speed resolves, right? But then by that logic, wouldn't Aphelios be bad because his weapons are slow and therefore proactive? Yeah, that the slow thing isn't a good example. So the reason Aphelios is able to like break that barrier of reactivity is because of the amount of choices you have with him. You can, unlike main decking a card like Siphoning Strike, Aphelios is getting his reactivity in a different way. You're right. I should have addressed this because I didn't explain this very well. Great question. Aphelios is reactive because you are choosing your weapons depending on the situation. And that's a powerful thing that basically nothing else, no other card even really like has that. It's mostly just invokes. There's a couple of other cards that kind of do that a bit, like Predict. But yeah, this is what makes him like such a powerful reactive tool. TF also does that. yeah. TF also does that when you play him. Exactly. True. Yep. There's very little counterplay to Aphelios and a lot to Kindred. Yeah, exactly. Like Kindred has to go through like steps. There's like a long chain of things that has to work for Kindred to like pay off in value. And Aphelios basically already has paid off in value the moment he gets summoned on turn 3. Actually, I don't know, man. It's kind of crazy. So I was in the Legends of Runeterra Discord yesterday. Someone actually put it really well. It's really funny because I was, you know, some people were showing me their decks, and some guy was running Aphelios in like an aggro deck, like it was just like aggro Aphelios. And honestly, like the thing is that's not even bad. Like he's a 3-mana 3/2 that immediately gets you a card, and like you're getting like you know, Infernum, or like you're stunning the opponent. Like I wouldn't run that in like a high level deck, but it's like for like a meme deck, like that's not even bad. You can run this card in aggro. It's whatever. It's the Aphelios. That's how good he is. You like just get Infernum and it's already fine. That's the sad thing. That's kind of the crazy thing. What if we nerf the hand size? Nah. There are larger repercussions on doing that. If the game adds more viable win cons, does that affect this reactivity bias? Sort of, yes. Yeah. Great question. I mean, that's like the problem is that's to a degree that's sort of what's already happening. Like that's you can say that's like why Lee Sin is good, which is because you can call Lee Sin a different win con. And like Ezreal in the past has worked like that too. Champions that don't have I've seen, and champions instead that just like win the game when they're leveled up in your hand. Lee Sin is that right now, and old Ezreal used to be that. That's kind of how you counter like the control-y elements of the game. The problem is that in both the cases of Lee Sin and Ezreal, more so Ezreal than Lee Sin, I'm talking about old Ezreal decks. Those decks were also built because of the nature of both of those champions happens to be casting spells. Those decks also tend to be pretty reactive decks in and of themselves. So those are good examples of exactly what I'm saying, of these decks that have managed to combine like heavy reactivity with what you can kind of call a different win con, right? Because you're just like leveling up something in your hand that your opponent can't interact with, which isn't fundamentally really that different from just like, you know, the TF or the Aphelios style of they can interact with it, but I have a lot of protection, and even if they kill it, I'm still fine in value, right? It's just, you have to see Ezreal and Lee Sin are doing that in a different way. Basically, I don't think that's really a good solution now. I think that's like kind of part of making the problem worse in a way, because those are the decks that end up like the meta right now is like the reactive nature of the game forcing a certain kind of top deck, and then the certain kind of top deck being selected by its ability to be uninteractable, right? So adding more uninteractable things to the game, what you're saying is alternate win cons. Just, I mean, it can increase the diversity of what things you can play at a higher level, but it's not really addressing the root cause, I think. If you did it in the right way, like I could maybe see that working if it was in the right way. Adding more atrocities as win cons as opposed to adding more Dawns and Dusk. Yeah, exactly. Like that's what I'm thinking. Like, yeah. I could see that. I could see that. What if TF could only trigger one wild card per action? That would be a fair nerf from a balance perspective. They might want to do something different about him. I would be kind of surprised if they I mean that's definitely one of the things they could do. But yeah, I mean for the most part right now, I think the larger problem is just like the reactive cards in Runeterra, the speed of cards ends up just being a little bit too powerful. There's no good cards that can really help like proactive game plans. Like the most important thing is just when you're having to do everything at like slow speed and when your opponent is doing everything at like faster burst speed, it doesn't matter that they're spending more mana. They're getting like so much value out of that. That's the thing about Runeterra, that speed matters so much. Like you look at cards, so like, you know, all the fast speed spells, like when everyone first started playing these cards seem so bad because we were all comparing them to like magic cards, like Grasp. It was like 5 mana for this effect, yuck. Or like Withering Wail, or like Vengeance, right? Like these fast speed effects that were just so overcosted. And partly spell mana is, you know, a really powerful component here, but it's just like the fact that all units are like slow speed and like all of these are fast speed, and you can counter this dichotomy of like open attacking to try to lock out the mana, and this being the counter to open attacking, right? And so the speed ends up being much more powerful than we initially thought. And honestly, it's still kind of too powerful in a way, right? Like the thing about units that makes them so clunky is that, yeah, they're just slow speed. They don't really have that flexibility. And they're so, yeah, like I'm not saying this as some kind of like universal rule, because obviously a lot of like proactive units are good. Every deck has some amount of proactive units. This is a broad generalization. I'm explaining why like most cards in general, the cards that are good are the ones that can break this idea of proactivity and this unit speed. Having to develop into attack being a big vulnerability of cards. And broadly, we see this setting cards back like, you know, a tier or two on average. Many exceptions. But like, and this is actually why I was thinking that that Jarvan would actually be decent. And a lot of people were like on the Jarvan train. The problem with Jarvan is just that he's still too weak. Like, he doesn't have flexibility. You can attack with him at speed, and the ability to attack at speed is like really, really valuable. But you can't choose what he's challenging. You can't choose to play him as a unit. Like, he can't not attack at speed. And he has a really hard time leveling up, just the way the games play out. Like, he usually will have like 3 strikes from enemy blockers, but 4 is actually surprisingly difficult to get. So Jarvan ended up kind of flopping because of that. Jarvan can't level up off of quick attack. Yeah, if he could level up off of quick attack, he would actually be a lot better. Because a lot of the decks that are, you know, a lot of the new decks running like Penitent, Squire, and stuff like that are running some quick attacks. That would be a lot better. Here's my summary of the issue. Aphelios and TF are really yikes designs because they both force interaction and punish it at the same time. Must kill shouldn't be given immediate value, but there should be kills that require people to interact with each other. Yep, exactly. Like, it should either be immediate value or a must kill and not both, right? Pretty much. They're doing 3 things at once. They're, yeah. Forcing and punishing interaction at the same time while still being like powerful tools that are able to be very flexible on the opponent's game plan in and of themselves. I think there's a lot of cards that both kind of force interaction and punish it at the same time, but usually those kinds of cards like only focus on their own strategy and don't really hurt the opponent's strategy at all. And those kinds of cards don't actually end up being amazing because of that. Whereas Aphelios and TF, the third factor is, yeah, they're also like shutting down the opponent's way to win as well. But yeah, that's pretty much like kind of the problem right now. And so it's important to understand the problem so that we can know, like, you know, what would be good axes for solutions and like what kinds of things we're expecting. Nothing's really changed. I don't think you need anything super fancy, honestly, but it's just important to like to address the problems as they rise. TF and Aphelios are the planeswalkers. That's kind of true. Yeah. A little bit. Like, just like these value engines that don't need to attack. They're basically planeswalkers. Yep. Fuck planeswalkers. Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways to address this. It doesn't really matter like exactly what example you choose, but I'm mostly just using this as a way of like ruling out certain kinds of suggestions, right? Like, it's not a really good idea to like nerf stress testing. I think people do overemphasize the incidental cards in this case. I'd probably rather nerf Aphelios than Veiled Temple. I mean, Veiled Temple getting nerfed would definitely make Aphelios worse, but I think that while the two are contingent on each other, Veiled Temple is more contingent on Aphelios than Aphelios is on Veiled Temple. And so I think a more direct approach in that case would be warranted and best. I think TF is just, yeah, I mean, you can reduce his floor for value. I think for the most part, if they were to make him just like harder to level up, which they probably will do, I'm guessing they'll just make TF like take 10 draws to level or something like that. That could be fine if they do other things as well. Like, you know, one other thing, something to like pick a card or something like that. I wouldn't hate that. Because at the end of the day, I mean, if TF is notably harder to level, then there is, you know, he is no longer a must kill engine anymore, right? Like, again, it's like Precipic was saying, you can't be like must kill while also giving like a really high floor for value on play. Increasing the draw threshold to level would solve nothing. I think it would be a pretty mild solution. I don't mean to suggest it as like an ideal solution. I'm guessing they'll increase it to 10 and nerf some of the component parts like pick a card or stress testing. I think like 1 or 2, like if they were to nerf a couple of like the cards like gold card or red card or something like that, that would probably be a little bit better. A lot of people are saying blue card shouldn't be able to have a tune. And to be honest, from a design standpoint, yes, it totally shouldn't. Like, blue should not be able to attune. That's just silly. And that's kind of the easiest solution. However, I mean, blue attunes because one of his blue card in this one MOBA is also like a kind of a thing that does something with mana or something like that. And I don't know if they want to break that. And I don't know if they should break that. So it's definitely worth looking into other options. Ruben says he doesn't want to repeat Ezreal by changing only the level number or amount. Hey, that's good. Look at that. I agree. Pog. Alan's solution is unironically pretty good. TF doesn't generate cards the turn he levels. Yeah, that wouldn't be bad either. I'd be fine with that. It'd have to be like, yeah. They could like change that, because it's honestly not even intuitive. The fact that he levels and he like resets, that would be inconsistent with Jinx, Lucian, etc. Yeah, this game is fucking inconsistent. Inconsistency is the least of their issues. Anyway, that's pretty much how I'm feeling about it all. I do think they're gonna do like a fine balance patch. I don't have any like problem with the patch that I suspect they're gonna do. Who knows? As mentioned, yeah, I'm a little disappointed it didn't come out earlier, but I can understand. Honestly, yeah, I mean, it was just like, it would have been better to have like a balanced patch probably before the expansion. I think they sort of painted themselves into a corner. I think they have a bit of a hard rule at Riot, like they don't want to do a balanced patch like within 2 weeks of an expansion. You know, maybe like later than that. Because I think like the other ones, Bilgewater and Targon, we both got 28 days into the expansion, right? But I think the bigger problem is we just didn't get the balance patch before the expansion, and that's kind of the issue, right? Like, similar to how they did with both of the last 2 expansions, Bilgewater as well as Targon. If they had like toned down some of the power cards in the balance patch leading up to the expansion, I think a lot of people would have been like much more like receptive, and like people would, you know, enjoy the meta a lot more. There would be a lot more interesting things. How does an MTG player print TF and Aphelios? They're clearly way too similar to Oko. If you had to choose, would you prefer if TF Aphelios was completely gutted to being unplayable versus letting them stay as they are? It's kind of a bad question. I don't get the point of this question, because like, I mean, there's no it's like one of those like pointless hypotheticals. I mean, usually in cases like this, I guess it's slightly better if they're completely gutted, but that's not really a good solution. In fact, that's a pretty horrendous solution. I mean, you're just asking me which of 2 really bad solutions do I prefer. And this one is a non-solution, and this one is basically one of the worst solutions possible. I don't get it. I mean, I don't know. I've never really understood hypotheticals. Hypotheticals have been just like weird in general. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's slightly better if they're removed, but that's, I certainly wouldn't advocate for that to happen at all, because I don't think that's a good idea. All right, let's add another spell speed greater than burst. Oh, that's what fucking Zilean is gonna do. He's gonna be able to play a spell that goes back in time. Oh, faster than burst, baby. Sounds fucking good, dude. Yep, let's do it. What do you think the strongest burst speed spell is? Oh, I started to explain this before. When I was saying burst speed, I wasn't really talking about burst speed spells. It's important to understand what I mean. I'm talking about burst speed resolution, right? Like old Ezreal, where like when you play a burst speed spell, his ability resolves at burst speed and can kill you from nowhere, right? TF, when you play a burst speed spell, you know, you're getting the you're getting the level up resolving at the speed of the spell you're playing, right? In the case of Rummage, that just means like, you know, they can't interact with the 2 HP TF anymore, right? They have to deal with like a leveled up TF that's also like throwing all the cards already, right? And Aphelios has a similar interaction, which is just like as soon as you play the thing, like the like Aphelios and Veil Temple both have interactions where like as soon as you play the thing gets generated, as opposed to like when it actually resolves, which seems a little unnecessary, right? And so that's a large part of what I mean. Like, I'm not saying like burst spells are necessarily like a big problem, because I don't think they necessarily are, but there's just a lot of things that resolve at burst speed, and some of those do happen to be spells. But yeah, I mean, it's mostly just like the attachments to the spells, right? And yeah, I mean, I guess the best examples would be these champions. But back in the day, it was, you know, it was Ezreal that was doing the same thing. Just burst speed resolution chaining to burst speed spells. What's the point of the stack if everything is burst? Yeah, I know, right? I don't know. Burst speed is kind of a weird speed. I think a lot of things could be focus speed. Now that, like, focus is in the game. Like, most things would make more sense at focused speed than burst speed. Like, why does burst speed exist? Because burst speed is there for, it's supposed to protect these like uninteractable, proactive sorts of things. Like it seems just kind of weird. Buff spells. Yeah, like combat tricks are necessary to be burst compared to focus. For sure. So yeah, burst does have a reason to exist. But most things that are burst feel like a large part of the reason that they aren't focus is just because focus didn't exist in the game at the time. Focus is a much more healthy version of burst in most cases. Yeah. Should level 2 Ezreal generate Mystic Shot counters like TF cards? Oh, I see what you're saying. So instead of resolving at burst, I don't think that's really necessary in Ezreal's case, personally. But I mean, maybe for long term you could see something like that, like the mini skill resolution. You don't mean Mystic Shots, you mean like the little like 1 damage pings. Yeah, like it could go on the stack instead of resolving. I mean, I don't think that's necessary here, but I think that kind of solution would be good moving forward. Like if they add new cards that are trying to do a similar thing, or if they feel like Ezreal, they do want to future-proof him or something like that. I want more Draven designs that get value by getting into combat. Yep, 100%. We just need to be able to attack more. But yep, that's pretty much just my thoughts on where things are at right now. And what some kinds of like solutions would be.